Sheriff Clay Hargrove didn't lower his voice because he didn't want privacy. He raised it because he wanted witnesses. That was the point of doing it on the courthouse steps at noon, with sunlight on the flagpole and a half circle of townspeople waiting for the weekly docket to begin. "Preacher," he said, smiling like it was friendly, "you keep stirring folks up, and I'll find a reason to put you in cuffs that'll stick." The word cuffs landed hard enough that a few people flinched. A few others laughed nervously because rural towns teach people early that laughing along is cheaper than disagreeing. And standing 3 feet away, Pastor Isaiah Langston held his Bible in one hand and a folder of voter registration forms in the other and didn't move, because he understood exactly what Sheriff Hargrove was doing. It wasn't about the law, it was about fear, delivered with a badge. Isaiah Langston was 48, black, and had the kind of calm that comes from bearing too many people and still showing up the next Sunday to speak hope into a room full of grief. He pastored New Hope Missionary Baptist Church in Bryan County, Mississippi, a place with an old wooden sanctuary, a choir that could wake the dead, and a history of keeping black families upright when local institutions leaned on them. Isaiah wasn't flashy. He didn't shout in sermons unless the Spirit genuinely took him there. He taught Scripture like it was a living document and treated young people like their questions mattered. The county called him respectable, which usually meant he stayed within the invisible lines they preferred. What had changed recently was that Isaiah stopped treating those invisible lines as holy. A pipeline company had announced a new route that would cut through a historically black area on the east side of the county, close to where the land dipped into wetlands and the soil held the graves of people no one in the county courthouse ever spoke about. The project promised jobs, but the jobs would be temporary and the damage would be permanent. The route also happened to skip the wealthiest white neighborhoods by curving neatly around them, like money had drawn the map itself. Isaiah began hosting community meetings after church. He invited lawyers from Jackson to explain easements. He helped elders understand the letters arriving in the mail. He started voter registration tables in the fellowship hall because he knew exactly how decisions got made in Bryan County. Not by righteousness, but by who showed up with numbers. Sheriff Clay Hargrove didn't like numbers he couldn't control. Clay was white, 56, thick-necked, always wearing mirrored sunglasses even on cloudy days, and had been sheriff for 15 years. He liked to claim he ran a peaceful county, but what he meant was he kept certain people quiet. He wasn't a cartoon villain. He was worse. He was a small-town power broker who knew how to dress intimidation in plausible deniability. He didn't need to say slurs. He didn't need to threaten openly in official letters. He just needed to show up, smile, and let the badge do the speaking. The courthouse steps incident happened 2 days after Isaiah held his largest community meeting yet. Over 100 people packed into the church's fellowship hall. Not just black families either. Some younger white residents came too, the kind who'd moved back after college and were less comfortable with the county's old rhythms. A reporter from the regional paper attended and took photos. Someone live-streamed parts on Facebook. Isaiah spoke calmly and urged everyone to attend the next zoning hearing and to vote in the upcoming county supervisor election. He didn't call anyone corrupt. He didn't threaten disruption. He simply did the most dangerous thing a black pastor can do in a place like Bryan County. He organized. The next morning, a county commissioner called Isaiah and warned him, in that falsely friendly voice, that things could get tense if he didn't cool it down. Isaiah thanked him, then held another registration session anyway. So by Friday, Sheriff Hargrove decided to make it personal and public. Isaiah was at the courthouse because he was accompanying an elderly church member, Mrs. Lottie Freeman, who had received a citation for improper signage after putting a handmade no pipeline sign on her fence. The citation was petty, but petty is how pressure begins. Isaiah wasn't there to fight with the sheriff. He was there to stand beside an elder and make sure the intimidation didn't work in silence. He walked her up the steps slowly, holding her elbow gently, and he could feel the eyes on them before he saw Clay. Clay stood near the entrance with 2 deputies, leaning against the stone rail like the building belonged to him. When he spotted Isaiah, he pushed off the rail and walked down 2 steps, smiling wide. "Well, look at that," he said loudly. "The Reverend himself." Isaiah nodded once. "Sheriff." Clay's smile stayed bright. "Got yourself a whole little movement going, don't you?" Isaiah kept his voice calm. "We're helping folks understand their rights. Clay chuckled like Isaiah had made a joke. Rights. One of the deputies laughed softly. Isaiah's grip on the folder tightened. Clay stepped closer, close enough that Isaiah could smell mint gum and coffee. He lowered his voice just slightly, not enough to make it private, only enough to make it feel like a secret shared in front of an audience. Preacher, he said, you keep stirring folks up and I'll find a reason to put you in cuffs that'll stick. Mrs. Freeman gasped. A young white clerk at the door froze mid-step. People on the sidewalk paused. Isaiah looked at Clay for a long second. Are you threatening me? Clay smiled wider. I'm advising you. Isaiah nodded slowly. Then advise yourself to step back. Clay's eyes flashed. You don't tell me where to stand on my courthouse steps. Isaiah's voice stayed even. Then don't tell me how to pastor my people. Clay's smile disappeared for the first time. You think you're untouchable because you got a collar? I think I'm accountable, Isaiah said. And so are you. Clay leaned in, anger slipping through the performance. Accountable to who? You. Isaiah didn't answer. He didn't need to. The crowd was listening now, and Clay had already said too much. What Clay didn't realize, what he never bothered to consider because he liked intimidation more than caution, was that one of his deputies had turned on his body camera earlier that morning after a training reminder. The department was under a state compliance review for use of force complaints, and the memo had been clear. Body cams on during all public interactions. Deputy Owen Sykes, white, mid-30s, had complied out of habit. The camera was recording everything. Clay threatened Isaiah again, even more explicit the second time, because men like Clay always double down when challenged. You keep talking about elections, and I'll charge you with interfering, disorderly, whatever I need. I've got friends in the DA's office. Isaiah felt the words hit like acid. Not because he feared the charge. He did, of course. Any black man in Mississippi fears a badge paired with a friendly DA. But because he recognized the ancient structure of it, the same machinery that had once arrested pastors for sitting at lunch counters now threatened pastors for handing out voter forms. Isaiah didn't shout. He did something that made Clay's threat harder to spin later. He repeated it clearly. So you're saying you'll make up a charge, Isaiah said, loud enough for two bystanders and Mrs. Freeman to hear. You'll find a reason to cuff me for registering voters. Clay's eyes flickered for half a second. Then he tried to recover. I'm saying you better stop causing trouble. Isaiah nodded. You just caused it. He guided Mrs. Freeman toward the entrance. Clay turned away with a final sneer and called after him. I'll be watching you. Isaiah didn't look back. He knew that line too. 2 hours later, Isaiah was pulled over. Not for speeding, not for running a stop sign, for a broken taillight that wasn't broken. Deputy Sykes approached the car with his hand near his holster and the wrong kind of eagerness in his posture. Isaiah kept both hands on the wheel. Pastor Langston, Sykes said, voice flat, step out of the vehicle. Isaiah stared forward. Why? Because you're under investigation for interfering with county business. There it was. The reason. Isaiah felt his stomach drop, but his voice stayed calm. What county business? Sykes leaned down slightly. You've been agitating people about the pipeline. Sheriff says you're creating disorder. Isaiah nodded once. Am I being detained? Yes. Isaiah asked for the charge. Sykes didn't answer directly. He asked if Isaiah had any weapons. Isaiah said no. Sykes ordered him out anyway. Isaiah complied slowly, because compliance keeps you alive even when it doesn't keep you safe. They cuffed him on the side of the road in front of 2 cars passing by. By that evening, Bryan County had its headline. Pastor arrested in pipeline dispute. It didn't say arrested for voter registration. It didn't say after sheriff threatened him. It didn't say on no clear charge. It said dispute, like it was a neighborhood argument instead of state power leaning on a black pastor's throat. But Isaiah's church didn't panic quietly. New Hope had survived too much to be silenced by one arrest. The deacons called a lawyer. The women's ministry started making calls. A young congregant who worked in Jackson contacted a civil rights group. And Mrs. Freeman, small, elderly, furious, went to the courthouse and demanded the body cam footage from the courthouse steps incident because, as she told the clerk loudly, that man threatened my pastor in front of Jesus and everybody. The county refused at first. Then the lawyer filed an emergency motion. Then the judge ordered it. And when the footage arrived, it did what truth does when it finally gets allowed into the room. It changed everything. The hearing was held in county court 10 days later, and the room was packed. Not because people suddenly loved justice, but because the arrest of a pastor had crossed a line even some cautious folks couldn't ignore. The pipeline company sent a representative. The local paper sent a photographer. Church members filled the back pews. Isaiah sat at the defense table in a dark suit, calm, eyes steady, his wife holding his hand once before stepping into the gallery. Sheriff Clay Hargrove sat on the other side of the room with his jaw set, trying to look like he belonged there as authority rather than defendant in everything but name. The prosecutor, a white man named Dale Pritchard, argued that Isaiah had incited disorder and interfered with official county operations. He spoke in vague phrases, the way weak cases always do. He implied Isaiah was radical. He hinted at outside agitators. He described the pipeline protests as a public safety concern. Isaiah's attorney, Mariah Gaines, black woman, late 30s, sharp-eyed, stood and said simply, "We have evidence." She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we move to play the body camera footage from the courthouse steps." Clay's face tightened. Pritchard objected weakly. "Relevance," Mariah replied. "Relevance is the sheriff threatening to fabricate charges. The stop was pretext. The arrest was retaliation. The footage proves intent." The judge allowed it. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly. A screen lowered, and the video played. It was grainy but clear enough. The courthouse steps. Isaiah helping Mrs. Freeman. Clay approaching with his smile. The first threat, "I'll find a reason to put you in cuffs that'll stick." The second, worse one, "I'll charge you with interfering, disorderly, whatever I need. I've got friends in the DA's office." Isaiah repeating it back, calm, clear, so there could be no misinterpretation. Clay's voice unmistakable. The deputy's body cam capturing everything, including the small laugh from a bystander and the shock in Mrs. Freeman's gasp. In the courtroom, a sound moved through the audience, an inhale like a wave. The judge leaned forward. The prosecutor went pale. Clay stared straight ahead, jaw locked so tight it looked painful. When the footage ended, the room stayed silent for a full beat. Then the judge spoke, voice colder than before. "Sheriff Hargrove," he said, "stand." Clay hesitated. "Stand," the judge repeated. Clay stood slowly. The judge looked at the prosecutor. "Mr. Pritchard, are you aware your office is named in this recording as participating in fabricated charges?" Pritchard stammered, "Your Honor, The judge cut him off. "Answer the question." Pritchard swallowed. "No, Your Honor." The judge turned back to Clay. "Then explain why you are on camera stating you can create charges that will stick." Clay tried the only thing he had left. It was a figure of speech. Mariah Gaines laughed once, sharp. A figure of speech and a threat. The judge's eyes narrowed. It did not sound figurative. Clay's face reddened. "I was trying to maintain public order," the judge replied, "by threatening a pastor for registering voters." Clay opened his mouth. Nothing came out, because there was nothing left that sounded like law. The judge dismissed the case against Isaiah on the spot. Not continued, not reduced, dismissed. Then he ordered the courtroom clerk to forward the body cam footage to the state attorney general's office and the Internal Affairs Division responsible for law enforcement misconduct review. Clay's eyes flicked toward the door. Too late. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Microphones appeared. Isaiah stepped down the steps slowly, the same steps where Clay had threatened him, and stood beside Mariah Gaines and his wife. A reporter asked, "Pastor Langston, what do you want to say to the sheriff?" Isaiah looked at the cameras and said calmly, "He said he'd find a reason to put me in cuffs. Today the reason he used got exposed." Another asked, "Do you feel vindicated?" Isaiah paused, then said, "Vindication is not the goal. Safety is. Truth is. A county where the sheriff can threaten citizens on camera is not safe." Clay Hargrove exited a side door later with 2 deputies around him like a shield. He didn't speak to press. He didn't need to. The footage had spoken. Within a week, the state opened a formal investigation. The DA's office issued a statement distancing itself from Clay. The county commissioners who had always stood beside Clay suddenly found urgent reasons to talk about accountability. Sheriff Hargrove called it a political witch hunt. New Hope called it consequences. The pipeline company postponed the next public hearing because the county's credibility had cracked in full view. Voter registration at Isaiah's church tripled, and the quietest, truest moment came on Sunday. Isaiah stood in the pulpit, looked out at the packed sanctuary and said, "They tried to scare us with cuffs, but God and a body camera had different plans." The church laughed, not because it was funny, but because relief sometimes comes out sounding like laughter when your people have been holding their breath for too long. He didn't preach revenge. He preached record. He preached courage. He preached that light doesn't ask permission from darkness. He reminded them that truth survives best when it's documented, shared, and defended by community. Sheriff Hargrove threatened a black pastor in public because he believed the town would protect him and forget the words. Then the body cam played in court, and the same threat that was meant to silence a man became the evidence that freed him. Not because the system suddenly grew a conscience, but because technology forced it to face itself.